Your voice, your opinion, your community. Fact TV, free speech protected.
Hi, my name is Chris Pratt, and I guess I'm hosting this thing, but I'm talking with Emily Peyton, who's running for governor, and we're really going to have kind of an off-the-cuff discussion of some of the issues related to COVID-19. I should probably start off by one of the reasons I'm here is to also promote Emily's candidacy. She's one of the few people that actually the only one I know who's engaged in any kind of a political role where honesty, integrity, virtue are real things. They're not campaign pledges. That's kind of the person she's been for all the years that I've known her. So to that degree, we're going to talk about some of the inconsistencies that seem to surface again and again in reference to this COVID thing. As I say, my name is Chris Pratt. I've been a activist ever since 9/11. I've produced about 70 videos, had 250,000 views. I've done websites, so I'm quite familiar with the issues that are related to challenging the status quo and questioning things that no one really talks about or questions. And COVID is kind of full of them. So we're really just going to have a discussion about the whole thing. And as I say, I'm now in the process of writing kind of a book, web, multimedia thing called Under the Cover of COVID. So I've been kind of studying the issues for a while. Before we get into things, did you want to say anything from the get-go?
Well, yeah, I wanted to talk from the get-go about...
It sounds like we're doing a Get-Go commercial for...
a Geico commercial. I want to talk about the civility and the absence of it and how important it is. And actually, I think that President Trump has really eroded our sense of civility, and I think he's done a huge disservice to America by that. And a lot of people want to ask me if I support Trump or not, and that's a question for a different show because we're going to talk about COVID. But I am truly saddened to see the level of meanness, the level of name-calling, and I think that stems from the fear, which I think is such a huge secondary harm that has increased our stress. So insofar as we've become a divided people, become a people that are frightened of one another, I'm terribly saddened by that. And on my Facebook page and with people, I insist that we speak with civility, that we treat one another with respect, no matter what party we're from, and that we listen to one another's ideas, because my platform includes methods for us to return the power to the people by developing neighborhood councils, people's assemblies, with the power to fund the things that we want. And in those neighborhood councils, of course, there's going to be people that we might not get along with, and we need to learn to work together to get to the things that we want. So I generally don't like to even use labels like Republican, Democrat.
Yeah.
We're all just people.
Well, speaking of your neighborhood assemblies, this is your councils. This is one of the last media platforms where that actually takes place, where you can get locals together to talk about issues, and they're broadcast to other locals.
Yes.
I mean, ideally, this could be a huge platform for locals to develop a voice. And that's one of the reasons I'm here, and I'm glad that's part of your platform, because, and I think that's coming. One of the good things about COVID is it's so bad, it's a huge wake-up call.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done a lot of research into quantum and quantum physics and what's coming from that. And I think there's two huge influences that could really reshape the world. One of them is quantum, which is the shift from things and matter to spirit and consciousness. That in the 3D material world, we'll lose. I mean, you got Rockefellers, you got the Gates, you got these zillionaires that really control everything. I was looking the other day at how much money somebody who makes $43 billion a year, and this is, I mean, do you have a guess? Because most of us live on $100 a day or less, which is about $36,000 a year or less. Mm. And then if you start stepping that up, and if you just go to the $36 billion level, do you have any kind of a guess how much a day that means?
Oh, let me guess, 25 million?
100 million a day.
100 million. Oh
100 million every day.
Oh my God.
That's the kind of battle we think we're fighting. It's a joke.
Yeah.
We're never going to be able to fight these kind of guys.
Well, fighting.
Well, I don't mean fighting. So the only way I think we need to shift our way of thinking. I think we need to develop quantum spirits. We need to start thinking in the quantum world. In the quantum world, we have 100,000 cells. We're richer than the richest out there. Yep. And if we start tying into the innate spiritual power that we all have, and if we start expecting integrity and honesty and virtue and
being good to your word,
yeah, then the world will clean up, because there won't be room for those kind of people that just live, they're leeches. They live off exploitation.
Well, can I reword what you said?
Sure.
In a different way, because I think it's absolutely important for us to focus on the fact that thought precedes reality. Mm-hmm. So what we think about is so very important. And if we are thinking about being fearful, then that's the kind of reality that's going to come to each one of us and to us collectively. So we can make significant changes and beneficial changes to the future if we're investing our thinking along the lines of what we would want to see and what we would feel good to see. And the more we invest in thinking on that, of course we have to contrast between what is, the more likely it is to come about. So the more major media you watch and subscribe to, the more likely you have been suggested to think about things in a certain way, and certainly a fearful way. That's not only harmful to your body, to your health, it's harmful to our future. Now, I'm not saying that you are unsafe medically at all. What I am saying is that we may be safer if we aren't so fearful. Each one of our cells will be less stressed, and there's other elements about COVID and about what I see to be a cover-up by the big pharma and so forth, in order to get us used to an idea that we need to be vaccinated just to be safe with one another, and we need to be 6 feet apart just to be safe from one another. So Chris and I are here because we really care about humanity, and we believe that all the regular people really want what's good for all. But we do need to differentiate between regular people who want the best for everybody and what I'm calling the psychopathic elite. And do you know the definition of psychopathic?
Well, I mean, as far as being fairly amoral and having no conscience.
Yeah, I just had it up. The psychopathic people, they don't feel remorse. They don't feel conscious.
They don't have feelings.
They don't feel empathy. They can be extremely manipulative. They can be prone to using crime and they can be extremely intelligent and ruthless. So they are attracted to positions of power, and it can be passed along, from what I understand, genetically somewhat. But when we're seeing people who have billions of money and people who have benefited from this COVID, they aren't like us. And I know people recognize this at a gut level. But their greed is truly something that is endangering us all. It's a sickness, it's a psychopathy. And the time is now or never, really, for humanity and the state of Vermont, this small area that we live, to begin to plan a different path so we are no longer in service of it. And that's what my platform and my work is all about. It's a transformative work. So if you're choosing me as your governor, get ready to be involved in a transformation in a nonviolent, deliberate, methodical way where the power of the people comes from within the people. And we do it step by step, not through riots, not through knocking down things.
Yeah, I want to return to your discussion on fear, and also related to what you're talking about. I can't remember the author's name, but there's a book that actually came out in 1510 that James Corbett recommended, called The Politics of Obedience. And one of the precepts in that book was, why do we go along with things? Why does no one ever stand up and say, this is wrong, this is morally incorrect, this is not who I want to be, this is not the world I want to create? But we don't. And the premise in there is that we've been enslaved for so long that it's almost been bred into us not to object, not to raise, because then we'll be recognized and we'll be targeted, and then the powers that be will hold us accountable. Well, COVID is an example of what fear does to you. COVID is an example of what money people and this power structure can do. I mean, think about it. We are told to wear masks. We're told we're actually, healthy people are being locked down. We're told to social distance. I mean, and this non-touching thing is beyond the pale. One of the things that this book says that you should do is practice acts of civil disobedience. And when I said to myself, okay, what does that mean? And when you think of what those acts are, it's absolutely frightening. Hugging somebody is an act of civil disobedience. Kissing somebody is an act of civil disobedience. Going to church, going to a funeral, going to a wedding, going to a movie, all those things are acts of, that couldn't be more Nazi-like in my mind.
Well, they aren't acts of civil disobedience. They are acts of enacting our unalienable rights. Now, that people have surrendered to edicts that trespass on those unalienable rights, I think also speaks to the human condition of wanting to get along. We are sociable people. We are a caring people. And of course, we have been suggested over and over and over and over that if we don't follow these edicts, that we are harming one another. And we deeply care. We are the ones who are feeding one another. We are the ones who are making sure the homeless people have enough. But the powers that thieve is what I call. If government truly cared, wouldn't everyone have a home? I mean, truly. So.
Related to that, all of us, or most of us, have been parents. Think about your parenthood and think about how sick this culture is. How many of you have had sick children? What did you do when they were sick? Did you throw them in the basement and isolate them? Did you wear a mask when you were in their vicinity? Or were you loving and kind and caring? I mean, we've gotten so sick. There's a friend of mine who was not allowed to go to his father's funeral. Can you imagine?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the world we live in. And we're not only accepting it, we're wearing masks and we're marching according to the arrows at the Hannafords. And I mean, it's absurd the levels we've been to. Well, I want to ask you one question. I'm sorry.
Okay.
My hot button got pushed.
That's what we're here for.
I've always wondered, if I'm following distancing, in other words, I'm at least 6 feet away from somebody, and you wear a mask, how the hell will I ever give you COVID? I mean,
this is true.
distancing doesn't, and you're wearing a mask that protects you anyway. Why should I have to wear one?
Well, most of us, when we sneeze, we cover our mouth, for one thing, and most of us don't spew on each other when we're talking, and most of us, especially in our culture, we're not standing a foot or 2 feet apart. So already we're ahead of the game there. But
even if you do, I mean, I don't go out in public if I'm sneezing or got a cough or anything. But if I'm 6 feet or more apart and you're wearing a mask, even if I did, there should be no way of you getting it.
Yeah, I mean, there's the common sense of things.
Crazy.
The common sense of things just doesn't add up. I mean, this is where we begin, is we look at things, and I think this is where a lot of the anger is in people who are going along for the reasons of helping one another, but they've got this underlining anger because common sense would say, why can you go to Walmart and Miggle and you can't go buy a bike at your bike store? I mean, who says that the knitting store isn't an essential business? It's an essential business to the knitting store owner and the people who knit. And it's not. It doesn't make sense, really.
Do you think by design the mom and pops are being targeted to put them out of business, and it's just the big box stores that are somehow essential?
Well, at the risk of being labeled a conspiracy theorist, and I think we need to eschew labels here and not use them as attacks. I think we need to look at the drivers of this response, and when we see that the transfer of wealth, 10% of the world's wealth has gone to the people who are already own 50%, so that now we have the first world's trillionaire. Yeah. When we see Bill Gates doing an Event 201, and I'm going to give you guys homework. Look up Event 201 and Bill Gates. Look up Bill Gates and the Corbett Report, CORBETT, and there's a whole line that you really need. You need the information. The information has value. So I do an awful lot of research, and a lot of people would have a hard time keeping up with me. But that's why I hang out with Chris, because he does too. So
Jim Corbett is an excellent site. I'm glad you brought him up, because he's one of my favorites. And he did a 4-part series on Bill Gates, 4 hours. I mean, they're long, but they're incredibly well researched. And other people that I respect keep pointing to those videos, to that documentary, that expose as really good about exposing who the real Bill Gates is.
Yeah, and he, it's important that he also shows what the tentacles of Bill Gates. It's not just Bill Gates the man; it's Bill Gates, the business, the empire, right? And I urge the public to be aware that we have a handful of people, and Bill Gates is one. The Facebook Zuckerberg, is one. Elon Musk, who's now into 5G, is one.
YouTube,
Google, and there's Soros. These people have Rockefellers. These people have the financial capacity to influence public discourse. They have the financial capacity. They own the media. They can make us be exposed on so many ways to a certain narrative. They can do social engineering.
Right.
So
they have been doing it.
They can and have been doing. But the minute that you see that, like the minute you know that Santa Claus might be your parents, you're aware that
you're a conspiracy theorist.
No, I just say that if things are not happening for the good of all, I mean, look at it this way. If all that wealth, if those people wanted to, if the people with that much wealth really wanted to, they could home everybody on earth. Everybody on earth would have a home. Everybody would have enough money to participate with dignity. Everybody would have organic food. Everybody would have, you just got to contrast it between the things that we want for each other, and the reality is that we don't have that. So
the reality is COVID. So, if they have the power to do all those positive things, why are we living under the guise of COVID? Because they also have the power to change the world's perspective. I think within days like 123 countries and 63 languages were all saying the same thing within days of each other about COVID and lockdowns and what the procedures were. And remember, so-and-so reported 10 deaths over here. And then remarkably, we shifted out of death. Remember what the COVID
Later
was?
on,
Now
was
it
it
becomes
May?
test scores now because no one's dying.
But back to the worldwide response, I mean, our death rates are much higher for AIDS, for cancers, and yet
TB.
we know that Monsanto is no good for the farmers. We know it's not good for ourselves. And yet there has never been a call by the government, let us stop poisoning our soil, let us stop poisoning our food, yet more people are dying. So when you contrast these things, people, then you begin to see the things that I see. You see that the integrity of the government has been really low, to say the least. The integrity of these large companies and Bill Gates has been abysmal. So when we follow orders of people who have no integrity, it doesn't bode well for us. So I think it's really important, and that's why I am standing for governor this time as a sort of a usual candidate. I'm getting contributions, and I have lots of lawn signs, and I'll be an independent when I'm through with a Republican. And you may ask, why am I in the Republican primary? Because our unalienable rights matter. They matter long term, and I think we could have handled any COVID while keeping those intact in a much better way. We have ancillary deaths that are rising because of the way we handled COVID.
Oh, you mean like 300% increase in suicides and spousal abuse and all the side effects that not dealing with COVID has. When you were talking about corruption, I mean, it came to my mind is, I don't know, and I'd like, if any of you people watching know of one large company, one government thing that is actually doing good, that actually is based in love. And it's not based out of fear, and it's not based on, I mean, I try to think of a company, a big company, that was really doing really good things. They really cared about people, and I had a hard time coming up with.
You mean of the like Nestle's and
all the big all the multi-billion-dollar companies.
Bill Gates Foundation. Well, you know what's interesting?
I couldn't think of any that are really make money out of doing good.
Well, the whole idea of profiteering is totally inappropriate in certain realms, in certain fields. Profiteering is inappropriate when it comes to healthcare. It's just an oxymoron. They work against each other. You cannot, when you're profiting from sickness, then you have this incentive to create sickness. So that's inappropriate. In our criminal punishment situation, if you're profiting from punishment, then you're creating criminality. So when we talk about the people who work, I mean, people work for all these people, and people have varying degrees of it goes from sociopaths to psychopaths, and of course those are the worst. But and people have been, as you said, I don't like to use the word enslaved because I'm really wanting to emphasize that we reach for our freedom and that we have a vision that we could have our freedom as I bring in these methodologies to for people to issue the money, for people to decide together what we issue the money for, because that's really a core. Our monetary policy has been just completely anchored in a U.S. dollar system that draws our wealth and gives it to psychopathically inclined people. So, when we stand up, and there's a whole bunch of things here that I wanted to address. I hope we get a chance to. I'm sure we will. Very passionate about this.
Oh, I didn't know if you're still going.
I know. It's like I was thinking, it's a runaway train here.
To me, it's just so obvious, that we have this culture, we have this economy that is really based in death and suffering and sickness. I mean, when you think of government and when you think of power and control, you don't think of the good virtues, you think of the bad. And if you think of sickness, for example, which was our whole medical system was basically created by the Rockefellers. And it's an allopathic model. It's based on managing sickness. It's not based on getting you healthy.
Right.
It's based on keeping you managed.
Yep.
So
Yep.
you have a big pharma,
Yep.
and you have
Right.
hospitals, and you have a whole culture that makes money.
Well-
I mean, think of the Cancer Association. If cancer was cured, how many people
Right.
would lose their jobs?
That's right.
Same with the heart. I mean, all
And-
these
and-
things are based on
Yeah.
us being sick.
Here's another homework, to write down a film on YouTube called Run From the Cure. It's called Run From the Cure because there's the race for the cure for cancer. Run From the Cure with the Rick Simpson story. Watch that, look it up, it's free. Knockout by Suzanne Summers, doctors who are curing cancer interviews. So those are interesting things. Here's another book. So you've got Knockout is Confessions of an RX Salesman by Gwen Olson. Those are important books. So what I didn't get around to saying is that there are people in government, there are people everywhere who have the Christ consciousness somewhat, and their working environment is a conflict with their Christ consciousness, but they have to provide for their family. So I don't want to emphasize that there's bad people. What I want to do is give us means so that our goodness can expand, and but we have to begin to draw a line and say that we are no longer going to support psychopathic business and corporate behavior. We have to draw a line right now. I mean, this time on the planet is critical that we pivot towards humanity right now. So I believe that there is a yearning for people to be civil with one another, a yearning to have a self-directed life. In other words, doing the very best that we can at the things that we want to and have the capacity to fund them. So what I'm bringing to the table as governor are the monetary systems that will allow us to fund the work that we want to do. And I'm not going to get into the wonkiness of it. I will simply say, take heart. They are there. We can have an economy that's based on well-being, on virtue, on the self-directed lifestyles that we deserve as free people. Let's get into the unalienable rights problem with COVID.
Well, you mean all the unconstitutional things that are going on? Let me just kind of also reinforce what you're saying, that the things that I talked about earlier about quantum physics is a new science that's coming out, and this theory of terrain versus germ theory, that we've got all these cells and we make them sick, and when they get sick they express themselves by shedding their toxins, which comes across
shedding their toxins. It sounds like shutting, but I know you said shedding.
It's better than shitting. Shedding their toxins, such that people diagnose that as spreading COVID, when it's basically just sick cells trying to get rid of the toxins that living in this toxic environment has caused.
Yeah.
But in reference to the goodness in people, which I also believe in, we also have to take responsibility. We can't just point our fingers at the psychopaths. There'll always be psychopaths. We're the foot soldiers for evil. Without us, without people installing cell towers, and without, we have to kind of balance off our need to provide for our families with what it is we do for money.
Well, that's the expertise that I bring to the table and that I will pull together with the people in Vermont. We do have experts, monetary experts in Vermont. Of course, I've been calling for a public bank. That's just one step. We cannot have government thieving from people through taxation. There are other mechanisms to fund government, and going back to government, and that they are serving a pyramidal power structure. One of our problems in Vermont is, and why I think my solution is the only one that will work, is that we've got an enormous bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy is reverse incentivized, like Big Pharma wants to create sickness to
Right.
solve it. If our bureaucracy solved the problems, even though there are really good-hearted people in government, if they solved them, they'd be working themselves out of a job. And so what we've gotten with our welfare state or whatever, we have the bureaucracy teaching the people to be helpless.
Right.
So that is something we need to overcome, and that again is why I'm calling for neighborhood councils, people's assemblies, roundtable summits, people's inquiries, so that, and also, of course, having all the committees meetings in the State House, and this is one of the silver linings of COVID, recorded on Zoom and available for the Vermont public, because we simply are working too hard to show up at the State House to see what lobbyists are and what's going on with the laws. So by opening that up to sort of a C-SPAN for Vermont, we have a much more direct connection to what's going on, and by having the neighborhood councils and people's assemblies, we are able to congeal, and there's mechanisms to come to consent, congeal the public will and create a more direct path for that public will to come into effect. That's the first step.
Yeah, to empower people to be who they should be, not who they have to be to make a living.
Mm-hmm.
And that whole thing needs to be shifted such that people can be empowered. Can you imagine hospitals becoming health spas? Can you imagine going to your doctor for a cure, not for another drug, so that you can keep maintaining yourself with whatever disease you have and feel less pain? What about eliminating the pain altogether?
Mm-hmm.
What about curing? What about preventing?
Mm-hmm.
What about, there needs to be
Yeah.
a whole shift in the way we think.
Right. So we never talk about when we go, let's say you go for a depression to the doctor, there's never like, oh, here, I'm going to give you a prescription for a music class or an art class. I mean, yet we
Yeah.
know that these sorts of things are very uplifting and helpful.
There's some kind of pioneers in the whole world of quantum. I don't know if any of you have heard of Dr. Joe Dispenza or who's the guy from... then there's quite a few people that actually have practiced quantum and have... The results are almost miraculous. I mean, you've all heard of the placebo effect and the guy's Emoto's water, and there's all these new powers and these new energies that are starting to surface that are being proven to have scientific basis, like qi. That's like ancient Chinese, and now they're finding out that there actually is subtle energy that's present with qi. What about when you hold a magnet and it makes graphite stand on end? I mean, there's all kinds of powers that go beyond chemical, that go beyond material. And that's what this whole shift to spiritual is.
That's right.
It's finding out the power that's innately there. And why aren't we using the 100 trillion cells that we all have to our betterment versus killing them?
So the power of prayer or meditation.
Thinking positive.
They've shown that people heal better when people are praying over them, and that you can substitute the word meditate, whichever you feel. But that we haven't even begun to really utilize our ways of being well in terms of how we think. And of course, we come back to being civil with one another. That's such an important place to start. And when I am your governor, should you choose to choose me, and I urge you to do so, in our discussions, one of the things that I'm going to absolutely be adamant about is that we begin to insist on civility in every interaction. Insist on respect for one another as equal human beings in every interaction. It's got to happen. Even when we're dealing with the biggest passions, we need to have that respect for one another.
I kind of drew a blank when we were talking about all the quantum experts that are out there, but there's quite a few that are exploring this phenomenon. Bruce Lipton, he's kind of the father of epigenetics. I think he was a biology professor at Duke, I think.
Eckhart Tolle. I mean, there's tons of them.
And they're all saying that
Right,
it's
Bob.
not becoming who we're not. It's realizing who we used to be.
Yeah.
It's just rediscovering the powers that are already there. I
That's
mean,
right.
think of the placebo effect. We poo-poo it, yet 30% of the time you do nothing and you get better. It's so
Right.
real that the rest of the world is using it as a measurement of chemicals,
Right.
drugs.
Right.
You know, and that phenomenon, there was an interesting experiment done where, you know, these powers that have just existed were just tying into them, where they took a room and they put a plant in one corner of the room. And then they had a light, and it used a random number generator, and that light would just spend X amount of time rotating around, and the corner where the plant was actually interfered with how much light it got.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than doing, I mean, and when
So
they
in other words, it drew more light, even though it was random. It tended to.
Even though it was on a clock,
It affected it.
it
So it was
override
not
it.
random. Yes, that's right. You
And,
know,
and they've done that. There's a guy in Harvard that's doing these things. When these massive events happen, there's a blip. He had a random number generator that would just do 0101 like
Yeah.
this. And when there's a massive event, it spiked.
Yeah. So within those ideas of how our consciousness leads the future, I'm involved with a nationwide group, and anybody is welcome to join it. And you can contact me through my website, where we're working on returning power to the people on a national level. So one of the things we do is we sit around, we talk about, well, we don't sit around and talk about, we do it over Zoom, but we talk about what is the better world that we know in our hearts and is possible. So getting into that discussion affects it to come about. Because if you think about it, everything begins in thought. In the beginning there was the word, to speak about it. So none of the items in the 3D materialistic world were there first. They weren't there first, and that they were thought of, and then they were spoken of, and then they were produced. So I just would love it if people really invested a good amount of time every day into thinking about the world they want to live in, just thinking about it in detail. And I believe when I can offer leadership for us all to get there with the power to fund it through means that maybe we haven't used before, but we'll be able to do business, and we will end this learned helplessness that divides us. So the divide and conquer we must overcome.
We can absolutely manifest a different reality than what we've seen so far. We absolutely can. And, you know, that's the challenge of humanity. That's the challenge of your governance. That's the challenge of love versus fear, or life versus death, black versus white. I mean, we've got to turn the world right side up again. I mean, and if you look at COVID and you ask yourself, is there any element of COVID that's love-based? It's all fear. It's all fear.
Well, I mean, we certainly should protect our most vulnerable. But as we said, I think at the beginning, that there's never been a lockdown of the healthy people.
Ever.
And I think, go ahead.
I'm sorry, but I mean, if you want to take that concept to an incredible degree, the Marines are taught, if somebody gets wounded in the battlefield, to risk, you know, machine gun fire and their own lives to go out and pull that person in. Now, under these ridiculous lockdown rules and these ridiculous no-touch rules, I mean, if your own child develops something, you have to stay away. I mean, it's crazy. It's nonsense. And we're reinforcing that. We've got to start thinking.
So when we come back to the idea of the neighborhood councils, let's say we had our neighborhood councils in place before COVID hit. Now, what a neighborhood council is just like it sounds, a group of neighbors, your most proximate neighbors. And you have the capacity to communicate with each other despite your differences, to use a phone tree. So that, you know, maybe you want to skip one and phone the other, but you all have the capacity to connect through a phone tree and find out that you're all doing okay. Then you also have a skill chart. So the skill chart shows that if there were an Irene or if there was an emergency, you know who has what skills locally. It's a really important empowerment of the community that, again, I don't know why it isn't there already, but it's something that I will be working on, and having people helping communities, these neighborhood councils, to be able to overcome whatever ice breaking, whatever issues they need, so that they can be congealed enough so that they can use a phone tree, so that they can have a skill chart. And from there, the neighborhoods, and there's some that are already there, you know, they're just naturally there. From there, they are able to make further decisions, but we will be in a much better shape. I also wanted to talk about the problem of divide and conquer of the political system, because what I see, and maybe this is because I'm a woman and maybe the other competitive way is the men, we have candidates that step forward, and they step forward because of the passion in their heart and the vision and the courage of their convictions, that they have something to offer the good of all. And if we were really working for the good of all, we would be collaborating. Like John Carr has an agricultural manifesto. He has put into words so well what I've been working for, but he has a whole, he has the capacity to do it. We have David Zuckerman, who is a very personable person who has networks. We ought to be collaborating. They should be collaborating with me so we can implement the People's Bank, the People's Exchange, the Vermont credit card, all the monetary things that allow us to fund the future that we want to see. It should be for the good of all, not a competition to win a popularity contest or how much money candidates can separate from people's purses. It should be what policies are for the good of all and who is the best to carry them out. And these are the types of transformations that I encourage you to hold in your heart, hold in your imagination, because we're at a pivotal point where if we're at a chasm where we either leap or we fall. We can leap to another side where it is a leap. It is a leap to transform, of course, but being pushed and falling into what the psychopaths like Bill Gates and Musk and Facebook have for us, I think is a much harsher reality than what we can do together in a synthesis of our intentions.
I think COVID is a perfect example of left the way it is. If the status quo is left to continue doing what it's doing, we'll be in lockdown forever. I mean, this is kind of the final call. This is the final call to say, do you believe this crap? I mean, do you think that your government thinks it's okay to not touch somebody? To not go to a funeral? I mean, do you think these policies that are being advocated, and do you think media is complacent or colluding with this?
Well, I want to be sensitive to those who are experiencing fear, because I just was driving around with my campaign manager, and he drives too fast, and he usually slows down when I ask him, and then he didn't. And he said, well, I want you to cope with your fear. And I said, no, we do need to be sensitive to one another's fears, and I think the only way to address fears is through an examination of the facts that the testing, the antibody testing, is showing up common cold antibodies. So the cases that they're recording are there is almost everybody has some of these antibodies. So you had an actual number for the danger of COVID, and again, it's different for the vulnerable.
I mean, this is the absurdity of all. If you take the total state population of 636,000 people, and you divide it by the number of people that have died of COVID, you have a 0.000088%. So in other words, less than 1,000th of 1% chance of dying from COVID in the state of Vermont. Have you got that? Do the math. Take 636,000 or 56. I'm sorry. Take 56 and divide it by 636,000. You get 0.000088. If you convert that into a percentage, it's 0.0088%, which is less than 1/1000th of a percent of a chance of dying from COVID.
And
That's
yeah, and that's not because the question is that because there's other states that have such low, and places like Japan that have such low outcomes that didn't lock down. The question becomes was that because we locked down? And I think there's enough doubt that we need to look into that and see that. So
well, the thing that really bothers me is I say, big what? So what? 50. So why don't we just ignore the damn thing? We've ignored other flus. We've ignored TB. We've ignored zillions of people dying every year. They don't wear masks. They don't have lockdowns. They don't go through all this crap. They just suffer through it. They develop herd immunity. They exchange germs. They develop a natural immunity forever, and we live through it.
yeah.
I would rather die, to be honest with you, a free person, and caring about my children and my friends and hugging and being able to be a loving, living person than living in the basement with a mask on in a totally fear-based world. If I have to die, I have to die. I mean, the chances of me dying are minuscule anyway, so why are we doing all this COVID
the chances
testing?
of you dying are 100% at some point. I think.
You know, I mean, oh, no, I know of dying of COVID.
Right.
I mean, it's so crazy. We're doing all this stuff for what?
Well, we want to die being loved and being happy. And we haven't gotten into some of the hope that's out there. I wanted to there's a lot on my website, a lot on my Facebook page, I've been posting a lot of evidence that is out there. And I think we ought to be utilizing the hopeful stuff that we find. We find that hydroxychloroquine and zinc is a safe drug that's preventative. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, the studies have debunked it. No, but I've looked deeper, and those studies have been retracted. And let's sit down and look at the evidence and look at the facts. And if we have a solution, I wonder sometimes if Trump just said it so that his base would heal and the rest of us wouldn't, because we think he was lying. But there are passionate doctors who would not risk their livelihood, their status, in order to come forward and tell us about it. And what about the censorship of these doctors? Isn't this an abridgment of our First Amendment rights?
Or assembly or protest or all kinds of things that have been abridged by this stupid thing.
Yeah, Colin, I'm going to ask you to put up that chart, please. This is a chart that shows country by hydroxychloroquine usage. The USA is in the yellow because there's been some states, the Midwestern block of 7 states, that didn't have the lockdowns that we did, also allowed doctors to use hydroxychloroquine, which, by the way, is a safe old drug. If you look at the studies, and they've been testing toxic amounts, everybody knows that anything can be toxic, even water, aspirin, if you do it in toxic amounts. So we've seen cover-ups before, people. You have seen cover-ups. I'm going to let you
tobacco.
Count to you find 5 to 10 cover-ups that you can count. Another piece of homework that you can find yourself and count them and ask yourself: do the most powerful psychopaths have the capacity to manipulate the media to cover up? So let's look back at the hydroxychloroquine. And you could see all the green places. Those are places where hydroxychloroquine and zinc are available over the counter. So if you take
it's a fairly cheap drug too.
It's like 11 cents. So you can understand why Big Pharma wants you instead to want the vaccines. It's important to know, people, about vaccines. This is the only one important point you need to know, is that vaccine makers have been made immune to liability. Now, this is so important. Congress did us such a huge disservice to do that, because the way the public knows that there is a harm from a product is through class actions and lawsuits, through the discovery where we find out the details. So the fact that the fact that they have made them immune to lawsuits is a total disservice to humanity. So we can talk about the harms of vaccines without talking about all the vaccines, because all vaccines are not created equal. And again, what is important is our freedom to choose for our own bodies. This is part of our sovereign rights, our unalienable rights that we elect people to protect and serve. And that's what I'm interested in seeing restored.
And I'll kind of wrap things up a little bit. With Japan is a wonderful example. Japan's constitution was actually drawn up by the United States after World War II. So it's very, very, very heavy on human rights and very, very limited on government's rights. So the government is afraid of the people. They will not go in there and tell them to do things. So this whole COVID thing is totally voluntary. So the whole country of Japan, which is 125 million people, there's recommendations, but it's up to them. They choose what they want to do. Some people want to wear masks, they wear masks. Some people don't, they don't. Some people want to go to restaurants and mingle and hug, and they're allowed to. It's their choice. And that fundamentally, I think, is what freedom and I thought democracy in the United States was all about. It wasn't being told by Gates or somebody that we have to do this, or Fauci or our governor or whatnot. That's fascism.
Well, I think the labels of democracy and republic and all these things, what I want to move to is self-governance. With, we can self-govern. We can have financial stability. We can have well-being. And that is what ought to be, what we ought to strive for, despite what the major elite and the governmental elite tells us differently. And so I ask you to hold that in your heart, and we will get there. I guess what I fear most is that people will choose to be victims, or choose or choose to be unempowered, or choose to be obedient, and not step into their authority.
I mean, and from my perspective, Emily represents a choice that's totally different than anybody you've ever seen in politics, and we need that. We don't need, another person pushing paddlum. Is it paddlum? What is that baby food? Paddlum.
Oh.
We need deep thinkers with people that dare to change things, people that dare to challenge authority and question why things are done. And Emily is one of those people. And if nothing else, she's a voice for change, and she's got my vote.
Well, thank you, Chris. Well, I'm not afraid of the people. I believe our collective will of regular people is wholesome, and that's what I want to focus. And I certainly want us to not be afraid of our differences. If you feel that some of the things that we have talked about need to be confronted by a different set of facts, contact us and we'll come on our next show. Let's discuss things in the most highest level of consciousness that we can reach, so that we can empower ourselves for a humanity that's worth experiencing. Yeah. And I want to thank Colin and Fact TV and just I'm so thankful to be with my colleague here.
Yeah,
we are all equal, and
I'm a guy though.
We can talk about we'll talk about the equal pay next time. Thank you, Colin.
Thanks, all.